Hi everybody, my name is Anna Kucher. I'm a teacher trainer and also a school governor with lots of interest in teaching, learning and curriculum. I'm a freelancer. I work with private students, multilingual, monolingual, exam classes, children, you name it, I like to do it. So thank you so much for joining me on this webinar today. I'm really excited to be running this today. It's the first session on Cuisenaire Rods. And like my other webinars, I do have just 3 things to ask of you before we get started. So the first thing is, please just put your phones as far as you can out of reach. It's so easy to be distracted by them. Try to just devote your time to looking at the screen, thinking about what we're working on, and try not to therefore Google things. You'll have plenty of time to do that afterwards. And also I've supplied a links page with lots of extra information that you can look up in your own time. I would suggest that you absolutely think about having a notepad and pen and some coloured pencils. And that was also in the notes about the webinar. So hopefully you have those ready. If not, leap up right now and get them. So what we're going to do is be thinking about what Cuisenaire rods are. And I know that some of you will have used them before and other people are completely new to them. And as you can see on the screen, these are the traditional rods. There are 10 of them and they're in different colours. And rods have been used for teaching for many years. So we're going to find out a little bit about the history and how they are, and then look at lots of practical ideas that we can use in our classrooms, both online and face-to-face. So first of all, thinking about the potted history of the rods, where they came into being. Again, just like to show you a technique that I often use. You can see that I've got some keywords on screen here. So I've got teacher, length and colour, arithmetic, manipulating, Caleb Gattegno, 1960s, London, and the silent way. So these are my keywords. Now, when I'm working with students, what I like to do is, if I'm in a face-to-face classroom, actually give them a set of words such as these, and they put them on the table in front of them and they try to work out what they think the order is. Now, I've been kind here. I've already put them in the right order on the screen, and I'm going to read a little text about Cuisenaire rods, and what you would be doing is actually seeing whether or not you've got your words in the right order. But hopefully now already your brain is starting to think, what could be the connection between the 1960s and Caleb Gattegno? What is the silent way? Where does London come into it? So this is just a way of getting people prepared for something they're going to hear. So just have a listen and think about how those words connect, and then I will show you the text. And the title of this text is actually Famous Belgians, Georges Cuisenaire. So Georges Cuisenaire, a Belgian teacher, invented a system of teaching basic mathematical concepts by using a set of rods possessing the 2 attributes of length and colour, known as the Cuisenaire method. Cuisenaire rods are used to illustrate the basic operations of arithmetic, as well as principles of place, value, fractions, and factoring. The method emphasizes the learner's capacity to learn these principles for him or herself as a result of manipulating the rods. They were popularized in the early 1960s by Caleb Gattegno, a professor at the University of London. Since then, many resource books and pupil workbooks have been written on the use of rods for children from preschool through to junior high. In TEFL, rods are often associated with the silent way, but this is not the only way they can be exploited. So we will look at how rods can be used to great success in the classroom with many different types of learners. So there's my dictation. Hopefully now you think about who that teacher was who's actually going to get is the name of the person who designed the rods, and I'll show you the text beneath. So in this case, I've got the words in the right place. 2 things I'd just like to mention. I would contradict that many resource books and pupil workbooks have been written on the use of rods. That is absolutely true in terms of mathematics, particularly as they've become popular again using the Singapore bar modelling technique. But in terms of using them for English language teaching, there's not a huge amount compared to other methodologies out there. But I've read lots and lots of different things and put things together, and some of them are for my own practice and ideas from other people, which I'll be sharing with you. In terms of Caleb Gattegno, this is the guy here, and he wrote a great book about what we owe children, and he really thought about the fact that basically learning is far more important than teaching, and this is what the rods are supposed to do, to be highlighting things. So it's not all about the teacher, it's about the person who's at the other end of the rods, which will often be the student. And in terms of the silent way, well, if you're interested in that, you can find out more at the second one of these sessions, when we're going to be covering that as one of the areas that we won't have time for today. Okay, so thinking about the rods themselves, and just Georges Cuisenaire, this chap here, decided to make maths more concrete. And what he did was he used these rods, and what you can see is that children can find out one orange rod is the same as 10 white rods, or 5 red rods are the same as 2 yellow rods. And he was looking at factoring and mathematics. And actually this has become popular in some countries. Have a look at this fantastic sculpture that was designed by Michael Parakovai, and he's a New Zealand artist, and he built this sculpture based on Cuisenaire rods, and people are using this kind of thing to help with maths. So children in this case look at the values of the rods and add up what they see in the sculpture. Now we can obviously use this in the classroom in a cross-curricular approach, but for our purposes we're more interested in linguistic benefits of rods, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So we can start. If you're new to the rods, the very first thing is thinking about the size, the colour and the comparisons of the rods. So as you can see on screen, we've got a photograph here of 3 of the rods. We've got a red one, a yellow and an orange, and you can make some obvious comparisons. Now we've got 10 rods with which to do that with these different colours, and it's a very simple thing to do. Just a word of warning though, in terms of colour. So let's actually physically look at these rods now. Hopefully you can see here, we've got our 10 different rods of the different colours. And one thing just to point out, I've got a ruler here just to show you, you can see the lengths. So here, the longest one is 10 centimetres, that's the orange. And we've got our 10 different colours. So when you're working with rods with students, first of all, you want to get them familiar, and just also check that you can agree on names and everything. So obviously orange is really easy, and so is the blue, the brown and the black. We've also very rarely have any problems with yellow, but just to bring you in here, you can see straight away we've got 2 greens. So we do need to distinguish those greens and decide whether they are light green, dark green, lime. What colour do you want to actually call it? For my purposes, mostly I'm going to call this one light green and this one just dark green. Different sets, you can get wooden ones and plastic ones. The colour can be slightly different. So this is one from another set, and notice that that is actually the paler of the 2. It's a different colour though to the one that we've got here. So just be aware of what you're working with. Red again is not normally a problem. Another problem area though is the whites. And if you look at these, you'll see that they're not really white. This one is white. These are very much cream. But for the purpose of working with rods, usually you can just say with students that you're going to call this one white. And the one that is the most problematic is almost certainly this one. What are we going to call it? Well, I guess technically it's really a fuchsia colour, but nobody's going to say that. So it's usually just referred to as a pink, or some people will say purple. But again, look at these rods. These are the equivalent rods from another set, and you can see there's a very large variation in colour. So it is important just with your students to establish what you want to call them. And then when you're working with them, you can be clear. But just going to the example that we had before, taking 3 rods here, I've got the orange one, I've got my yellow, and I've got a red rod. And I can put these together and make some simple comparisons about these rods, about which ones are longer, shorter, bigger, taller, etc. So this is a good starting point, looking at the rods, laying them out. Also encouraging students to hold the rods. For example, I can hold this yellow rod. I've got quite small hands, but I can measure it and see that actually this yellow rod is quite similar to the length of my little finger. I can think about the width of the rod. The brown one will go across the palm of my hand and I can just about touch it from side to side. So you want to get your students to be familiar with the colours and the shapes and doing that with their own hands. Okay, so another activity which is really nice with students is getting them to make some deductions and think about holding those rods and what they've got in their hand. Now, this is a really simple thing that you can do with the students. If you want to make it more fun, you might consider using a blindfold, like I've just put on now. So you could use a blindfold. Children enjoy doing that. Or you can simply close your eyes. And what you need is a bag with a couple of rods in. I've got a little bag here. And what I've got to do is put my hand in and I'm going to take one out. Or if I'm working with a partner, my partner can take one out. So I've got one in my hand now, but I can't see it. So I'm just going to cover my eyes so you guys can see it. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is make some guesses about it. So I could be saying things like, and I am going to say, it can't be the red rod. This is too big. And it also can't be the white one. I can feel that it's too big. It is bigger. It's not bigger than the black. This one couldn't be brown. It's not long enough. It can't be orange or dark blue. I'm thinking this is a middle rod. So it's probably the yellow. It could be the dark green. I'm going to guess in this case that it is yellow. Whoa, and I'm correct. It doesn't actually matter if you're right or wrong, because obviously what you're practicing is those modals. It could be, it might be, it must be. And getting students just to hold and guess will get them really familiar with the rods. Obviously beforehand, you might want to do a bit of teaching just to check that they know which modal verbs you can use. For example, I can't say that this can be yellow. That's not correct. Can't be used to make a deduction. So go over this. And again, thinking about, they might find it useful to have a set of rods with them or on screen, for example, this little guide so that you get an idea as you become familiar with it. Obviously, I've used the rods a lot, so it's going to be quite easy for me to get it right and guess. But if you're new to rods, that might not be the case. Now, taking this further, think about how all of this modal stuff could be great exam practice. Many of you may have worked with candidates that are doing first certificate or CAE, Cambridge Advanced English, where you get two pictures that you need to compare, such as these two. And the examiner says this. In this part of the test, I'm going to give each of you two photographs, and I'd like you to talk about your photographs on your own for about a minute, and also to answer a question about your partner's photographs. And then somebody's going to get given a pair of photographs like this, and there's their opportunity for using the modals. So it could be that this person is very experienced with yoga. I think they might be doing yoga, but it may be Pilates. This person is a rock climber. They must be with somebody else because it would be dangerous to do that by themselves. So deductions and speculating, nice introduction just using the rods, and then put it into something more concrete that students have to do to get themselves some points in an exam. So there would be a practical example. Okay, thinking about the simple thing of location and place and here. So we've got two red rods here. We've got our blue, light green and the white. And we're just literally saying where things are. Now, this is a task that is common as well if we look in IELTS. So with the full IELTS exam, one of the writing tasks is going to ask students to write up to 150 words and describe a graph, a chart, or a diagram, and talking about where things are located. So we're going to think how we could adapt this. So first of all, you could just start with your rods, basically laying them out and describing where they are. And then we can think about how to make this more complex, so this can start to reflect a writing task and indeed also be used for speaking. So how do we make this more complex? Okay, here's first of all the writing question. So we've got the map diagram. This is an example. So as the script says, it's likely to be a bit before or after street plan. So you can see here, there's a town before, a town after, thinking about the changes, places that are next to, in front of, parallel, etc. And how can you get students to have some practice with this? So for me, it would be starting with verbal practice and then getting them to write down what they have done. So one of these activities is called a running replication. You can do this in a face-to-face classroom and it's a lot of fun. You can also do it online, but you're not going to run, you would just replicate, and you would need to make sure that your students have the same equipment as you. Okay, so for a running replication, what do you need? Well, ideally, you need some little boxes. I often pick up things like old mobile phone boxes. You could use a shoe box, but it's quite big. Something small is perfect. So this is an old mobile phone box that I have. And you're going to need some rods, and you're going to need some of this, which in the UK is called blue tack. It's not chewing gum. I'm sure you have something similar in your own countries. And what you can do is you can either set this up yourself as a teacher, or you can get students to do it for you. So if I show you an example of one that I've made earlier, and we'll add to it, I've got a box and I've labeled my box. So I'm just showing north, east, south, and west. And you'll see that I've used the tack, so I can do it with another one. I put a little bit of the blue tack on one of the rods, and I'm going to position it in the box. So in this case, I'll put it here. So these are, I've set up the box. Now I can choose whether depending on the level of the students, do I fill the box completely? Do I use 10 rods, 15 rods, or just maybe 2 or 3? So depending how good your students are and level, you've got this. So what you're going to then do is, if you're in a physical classroom, you're going to put this box far away from your students. Now, ideally, if you're lucky and you've got lots of rods, you can have one box per pair of students. And you can also make the models inside the box different, so they don't need to be the same. So you position this far away from your student. I put this in a different part of the classroom. Students work in pairs. One student's going to get up and they're literally going to run to this box, look inside, and think about the location of the rods. Where are the rods? What is happening here? So I'm going to think, okay, there's a green rod in the northeast corner and it's vertical. Okay. Then I'm going to run back to my partner and probably whisper to them, say, there's a green rod in the top corner. It's northeast, vertical. And the other person will have a second box, or maybe just a square place on the table, and they will take a rod, they will take the same tack, and they will hopefully put it in the right place. But if they don't, you're then going to have a record at the end of where somebody went wrong. Because if they've placed it in the wrong place, either the person speaking has given the wrong instruction or the person listening has misheard. So it's quite a nice way for checking the accuracy and position of things. Before you start this activity, you need to be really clear with students. Are we doing vertical, horizontal? Are the rods going to stand up in the box? Are they going to lie down in the box? And it's worth doing one as a class together where you show, you actually position it, and you talk through the position a couple of times before you do this live. Running replications are fantastic with younger learners, but I've also seen a lot of adults have fun with this, and it's very challenging. How challenging you can make it depends on your students. Mostly students will really enjoy doing it, and they'll want to have a go for both people in the pair to have a go. So if one person ran the first time and to look at the model and the other person wrote, they're going to want to swap roles, so that the person that was writing gets to get up and run and go to the box and have a look at the material. Also, students will sometimes like the challenge of placing rods themselves in a box and then hiding that box for another pair to go and see. And they'll see how complicated they can make it. This is going to give you an extended period of time when the students are speaking, and it will then be absolutely fantastic for them, for the teacher to listen, monitor, check their use of prepositions, place, location, etc. When you've actually finished all of this running about and the physical part, get the students to sit with their box and then actually put a written description on paper or type up what they've seen, because that's where we're going to start being practicing for IELTS. And if we go back to our task, you'll see here in this thing where you have to talk about, for example, a before and an after. With all the writing, there are 4 criteria: the task achievement, the coherence, cohesion, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy. And you can have fun using these. You can also make before and after boxes, but there's lots of links to exam practice, and this is a great task to use with many different level students. Okay, another thing that links into an exam task, and this is by far my favorite way to start any lesson, regardless of level, and whether it's a private lesson with a one-to-one student or a large class, very often the classic way to start is to talk about where you are from. So I've got a couple of pictures here, a place in South America and a place in Switzerland. Again, it could be an exam thing where you've got compare and contrast of 2 different places. But what I really like students to do is describe where they live, actually using the Cuisenaire rods. So I'll show you, this is a photograph of some of my students, and what they're doing here, they're actually from different countries, and they've laid out on the table in front of them a kind of representation of their town. So it may be that these are roads, or it could be that these were big buildings. I don't remember. Here also, this student has probably put out a road and some houses. This could be a river. It might be that this person lives in a village, but it's really nice to get students to do this. So what I do is I start the lesson by myself laying out where I live and explaining it. And again, the explanation will depend on the level of the student. It could be very, very complex for a high level, even proficiency student, or really simple for a student that is of pre-intermediate level. I lay it out, I demonstrate, and then the students do the same with each other. And this is absolutely fantastic because, especially when you're breaking the ice, when students are looking down at the table and at the rods, they're not having to make direct eye contact with one another. And particularly for certain nationalities, but also shy students, it's quite nice to be focusing on this. And there's something about holding and manipulating rods when you're a little bit nervous, gives you something to focus on, to look at. And also, if you don't fully understand, you can go back and you can touch the rod that you don't understand. So I could say, sorry, what was this green one? Is it a shop? Is it a house? What did you say? Of course, there is then a huge amount you can do with this. So on this particular table, you can see that we've actually got this student, well, we've got 4 of the students have made where they live so they can compare and contrast. Again, great task for a lot of the Cambridge exam suite, comparing and contrasting things. You can get students to make basically little diagrams of where they used to live and compare that with where they live now. Or they could design their ideal town, their ideal thing. What I like is that usually the time of laying out the rods allows students thinking time to think about what they might say. When they're talking through the rods, they touch each rod as they go through, and that allows them to speak for a bit longer. Their partner can clarify what each rod is again, so that's going to continue the conversation. And you're going to get a nice chunk of dialogue or monologue if you're doing it one-to-one, which gives you a really good way of benchmarking a student's level. So when I'm doing private lessons with students, I will often do this. I share a little bit about myself by doing my own rods and then get them to do theirs. At the end of that, I can assess it. It's fantastic if you can record it, particularly if you're online. Record what the students are saying, and then you can analyze their pronunciation, their grammar, their vocabulary. Of course, we can talk about alternatives later, but clearly if you don't have rods, you can also draw things, or you can use Lego. And in the past, I've even seen people just use pasta shapes or little shells, any objects to represent different things. So breaking the ice is a fantastic thing to do. Again, with the IELTS, think about then using your band descriptors. So here's an example. You can go onto the resources for teachers and the cambridgeenglish.org page, and you can download many of the exam handbooks for lots of different exams. This is an example from IELTS. Here it shows what somebody needs to do for a band 9 or a band 8. Obviously, many students need, for example, 6.5. So you might want to see what's the difference between a 6.5, 7, 5. And after you've had that extended time speaking with the rods, can you then maybe play the recording back or assess and think, right, which band was that? With students as well, if you do record it and then you give them some lessons or you do some work, you can then re-record a parallel task so that they can see their progress. And also if you're moving through some bands or assessment criteria, you can help them to see that. So that's a nice thing to do. Thinking about something very simple, which links again into further exams, is just making requests. And this is, again, a very simple activity. This is for the face-to-face classroom. What you need, again, is a little bag with some rods. And students need, as you can see, this lady's holding a little card. And each student on their card has something different. So this one has that she wants 2 yellows, a red, an orange, and a black. And this guy's going to say he needs 2 oranges, a red, a light green, and a white. And what they need to do is they need to walk around the classroom asking and answering. Now, how you do that is you make sure that each student has got a different combination. So if I take a little bag, I could put in this bag 2 oranges. I've got a brown. Let's see what else I can find. I've got a blue and a white. So if this lady asks me and says, "Hi, can you lend me an orange rod?" I can look in mine and I'm going to say, "Yes, here you are." Now, the game is that if you have it in your bag, you must say yes, even if you need it for yourself. If you don't have it, obviously you're going to say, "Sorry, I haven't got one." So if this student says to me, "Please, may I have a red?" I'm going to look in my bag and say, "I'm sorry, I haven't got one. I can't help you." Now, I use this activity also for looking at formal or informal language. So we look at the difference between "lend me a red rod," "give me a red rod," "could you give me," "would you mind lending me?" And we think about how polite we want to be. And sometimes with students, I get them to mix and mingle. They walk around the room. One student is going to choose which register, which style they use. So this student might just say, "Excuse me, I was wondering if you could lend me an orange rod." And so this person, if they can lend it, and you say, "Certainly, here you are, help yourself," or something very polite, a similar formality. So a very nice, simple activity, just practicing asking and responding to a simple question of "can I have?" "Do you have?" Okay, and what you can do with this as a mix and mingle is actually record this. So we've got the question here, "Have you got a brown rod?" And what I can also do is get the students, and again, we'll put all of this on the website for you to steal and use for yourselves. So we've got the different coloured rods, and I'm just going to tick or put a 0 if it's not available as I ask my classmates. When I ask Paolo, "Have you got a blue rod?" he says, "Yes, I have, here you are." And I could take it. So we could be exchanging our rods. And obviously the idea, just going back to this screen, is that the student will win when they get everything that is on their little rod shopping list, which is not as easy as it seems if you have to also give away the things that you're asking for. Okay, really simple thing with loads of mileage is making clocks with rods. As you can see, these lovely ladies have made a clock. Now, in this case, they've made quite a serious clock because they've also put the orange outline. You don't need to do that at all, but you can just lay out the rods and think about, first of all, depending on level, practicing simply telling the time. So it's going to be a very quick way to look at quarter past, quarter to, half past, it's noon, it's midday. But obviously you can then, as soon as you've got a clock, you can do, apart from telling the time, you can talk about routines. So what do you normally do at 8 o'clock? Move the rod round to the correct time, ask a question, think about practicing numbers, think about just keeping it really simple to start with whilst they're making these little clocks, familiarizing themselves with it. And then, of course, you can use it for more in-depth language practice. So here's another example of a clock that the students have made. The light green ones obviously are showing the O clocks and the past and the quarter twos. And we've got the other little red ones. And there are two different colors here, the big hand and the little hand. So you can get a student to move their hands off their clock and then ask some questions. So in this case, we could look at past simple and past continuous. So where were you between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m? And the suspect says, I was visiting John. We then move the clock around and we ask for another time. So it's just a very simple controlled practice, but it has a physical element. We can also, of course, use it for futures. So here we've got a simple little diary. We've got some times in the day and some activities that we might be doing at those times. I've got my date, my calendar, and Paul says to Liz, what are you doing on the 21st? And Liz looks and says, I'm having lunch with you. Didn't you remember? And again, we would just move the hands off the clock. So the students take it in turns to move those hands and ask and answer questions. Obviously, you can use it for past tenses, for future. You can do it for right now, the present. And it's just making the control practice a little bit more interesting than that classic kind of gap fill or just doing something. Just the physicality of it makes it more interesting for students. Okay, again, the physicality to make something interesting. I confess I hate maths. I'm not a mathematician and I don't really like bar charts very much, but IELTS likes bar charts and as do some other exams. So again, classic writing task from IELTS in question 1 is looking at a bar chart and then writing a 150-word report. Well, you can again, of course, do that more spontaneously using Cuisenaire rods. I just want to also demonstrate from this photograph, some of you may still have classrooms that include overhead projectors. They're going out of fashion, but I like an overhead projector, especially when you can get these little Cuisenaire rods which the light comes through like stained glass, and you can make little bar charts really quickly, project them up to the class and talk about it. But you can do it on a table in front of learners. So here you can see these learners have put out a chart. Here's another example just on top of a piece of paper. They've got January, February, March, April. They've written the months. They've got some statistics. And then they're thinking about describing their graph. And again, just reminding students, what do you need to do? What are you going to be assessed on for IELTS? Let's get some practice. So do it verbally first and then write down what you see. You could make a number of these and have them around the classroom, give them written descriptions. They match the written description to the physical graph, the bar graph that you have created. So rods are really great for things like this. Just gives a whole other element to it. Rods are also very traditionally used in looking at other patterns. And this is most likely, if you have used rods before, probably what you've done with them. So here, we're looking at thinking about question formation and just doing a really simple activity with students. So we've got a little bit of some facts here. We use do for I, you, we, and they questions in the present. We've got our auxiliary does, we've got did. And then we want to ask the students what some of those rules are, if we're looking at it with them. So we change the position of the verb and the subject when we have, well, what do we change it with? Well, we have a modal verb, so we could have may, must, might. Just move this so you can see it. And the rest of our pairs of modals, could, can, will, would, shall, should. So with these, if we have one of these modal verbs, we're going to swap them over, and we're going to use do, does, or did when there's no auxiliary. And of course, just to confuse students, to add into that, we have got the fact that we've got have, like have got, which becomes an auxiliary, and also the verb to be is an auxiliary. So that's going to go in our group up here. Now, when we want students to have a look at these rules and think about how they work, oops, sorry, here we go, let's just move these. Okay, so we can give them some sentences and lay those out with rods. So here we've color coded that red is our subject. So in this case, Yoshiko, and here, she. The pink is the verb, likes, and put it in here. Yellow is everything else, a complement, because we're not worried about the rest of the sentence really for the purpose of this. And light green is our auxiliary verb. So when we look at this sentence, we don't have a green, so we need to add a green. And that's how we're going to decide how we make the question. And we're going to put that right at the beginning. So does she like shopping? If we look at some of these ones as well, we can color code again. Now you can lay it out with rods, or as you've seen here, or you can simply use the colors with a highlighter pen or colored pencil. So here I can see that I want my subject to be red. So here are the names of my students that I put in. There's my subject. I'm going to see if I can see auxiliaries. Oh, so auxiliaries, I've got a doesn't. I can't see an auxiliary here. I can't see one here. I've got one here and here. Not here, not here. Oh, has wasted. There's an auxiliary. So I've got the green in there. And then if I go back, I can see that I needed the pink for the verb. So I've got like, buy, spend. We've got, what else have we got here? We've got another spend. We've got become, buy, invest, and waste as our verbs. And then all of the rest of it, which I won't bother highlighting for you, but these ones are all, the yellow part is the complement. So students now need to think about, if there isn't a green, they're going to need to put one. And if there is, they can just move the position. So here we've got Shohei should. There's our auxiliary. So we're going to be putting should Shohei spend. But in this sentence, there is no green. So the students are going to notice that there's a green missing. They need to add something. So they're going to have to add in the auxiliary, and it's a third person. So does Faisal, and we're not going to put the S on because that's there, and off we go. So the idea is that students will basically start to see patterns through colors, through shapes, through movement. And that's just a really useful thing for them to do. Okay, so hopefully you've already had a little taster of what you can do with rods, some fun things, some useful things, exam practice, really basic English, more complex stuff. There is so much more to say about rods. They are fantastic for storytelling, pronunciation, assessing level, and this and many other things we'll look at in our second session. So I really hope that you'll join us for that in October. But in the meantime, please check out the websites for the ELT resources at galleryteachers.com, where we've got lots of extra material, and there will be links to worksheets and things that you are very welcome to use in your own practice. So if you don't have a class set, what can you do? Well, first of all, what do we mean by a class set? I think that really kind of means rods, enough rods for all students. Well, one thing is that you could just consider investing in getting a single large box. So this is an example of a big box. You can get them second-hand as well. One of my happiest days was when I went to the town of Salisbury nearby and went to a second-hand shop, and they had this amazing box of vintage rods in there, very, very cheaply. And I was just delighted. So you can get hold of a large set, and a large set will give you enough. You don't have to have them for everyone. There are smaller boxes as well that you can get, plastic boxes like these, which will have sets of rods in for students. You can still do quite a lot of things with just a small set. But what you can also do is you could choose, if you've got the overhead projector, as I showed in the webinar, you can get overhead projector rods. So you could get one set of those that the whole class is going to be able to see. And you can also get ones, if you see I've got a whiteboard behind me, magnetic whiteboard rods are also available. And that would mean that you could use those with your students. So students can also use as a substitute their own pencils and pens, felt tips, and then do that. Now, so there are lots of ways you can get around not having a full class set. You can also use completely different alternatives like pasta shapes or Lego. Many students have Lego, and sometimes that can be easier to get hold of. So if you are teaching 100% online and you're not in a face-to-face classroom, what can you do? Well, hopefully in this webinar, you've seen that you can do some things yourself. So you as a teacher can demonstrate by holding rods up to your camera, or if you're lucky and you've got a second camera, again, I should get paid some marketing fees, but I have sort of something very similar like this, just a little camera that can move around. And that means I can demonstrate something on a table in front of me, which kind of allows me to make the online classroom a bit more similar using a visualizer to model things to students. Again, if you're not in a face-to-face classroom, you just need to give students a warning, and you need to say, today we're going to look at some patterns. Bring your felt tip pens, have those next to you with the computer, have some paper. If they have Lego, they could also use that. Obviously, the perfect world is where you get to do a bit online and a bit face-to-face, because you can make use of rods in both those situations.